We know that Ed Miliband, under cover of night, went to see Russell Brand. The Tories have reacted already, and David Cameron has said, Russell Brand is a joke.
Russell Brand's a joke.
Well, I think the Prime Minister should be well advised to wait for the interview to come out.
If Russell Brand doing an interview helps us get that message out, so be it.
I haven't got time to hang out with Russell Brand. Ed Miliband, hang out with Russell Brand. He's a joke.
They're saying boxing.
I'm not taking my shoes off.
Don't you dare.
Well, let's see what happens.
Russell Brand is one of the people who said in the past that he doesn't think people should bother to vote.
Because we haven't seen the full interview yet. Did Russell Brand say, all right, you're right, Mr Miliband, well, tell him to vote Labour?
I've not seen the full interview either.
Hello, welcome to the Trews. Last week was Politics Week. It's like an election. It's hard to ignore an election. As I've said before, it's kind of like if our religion is secular commerce, then a general election is like Christmas, and you can't just bar humbug your way through that. You've got to have a look at it. We looked at the Lib Dems. That was the first thing we looked at.
We could have stood by and watched people lose their jobs and watched the Conservatives make the poorest in society pay the price. But we didn't do that. We stepped up to the plate.
We didn't step up to any plate. They said fair taxes in tough times, but back to Tory tax cut for the top rate of tax, giving 13,000 millionaires a tax cut worth 100 grand. You know what I mean? Like, you could have, that's one where you could have, no way, look, I've let go on the tuition fees, but that thing of letting off millionaires, I'm not going to do, all right, I will. They backed the mansion tax is right, it makes sense. Then when it came to the vote, they voted against it. They said, we will help the NHS, then backed David Cameron's top-down NHS reorganisation, which wasted $3 billion. More people now wait longer in A&Es, and 5,000 nurses have been cut. I mean, who wants that? Who in Britain, from this lovely kid here to me to anyone at all, goes, we want to get rid of 5,000 nurses? We go, yeah. I thought that it was a very contrived piece of propaganda, and in a way showed you everything you need to know about the Lib Dems. Next up was UKIP.
We cannot control our borders. We have an open door immigration policy, which has seen vast numbers of people come into Britain.
Immigration is like the USP of UKIP. But the reality is that the UK economy gains 20 billion from European migrants who ultimately end up contributing to the economy. A quarter of all nurses in the UK are recruited from abroad, and 30,000 Brits left the UK last year to claim benefits abroad. Ridiculous to think of a British person as like, look at that bloody immigrant. You ain't a bloody immigrant, piss off! Well, we are in Spain. Oh, fair enough. A party political broadcast where a cadaver sits in a chair and then surveys the white cliffs of Dover as if personally trying to stop people getting into the country tells you how one note UKIP are. According to Nigel Farage, all of the problems in this country are a result of unskilled migrant labour. I left the house this morning, some unskilled migrant labour crashed the economy. Then I got into the car, the media was owned by unskilled migrant labour and it kept influencing me. I kissed my wife, it was an unskilled migrant labourer instead of my wife. You can't take them seriously, it's bloody daft. I've sort of said before, like, after a revolution, the Greens are the very kind of people you'd want in charge of running things, not like a narcissistic lunatic like myself. You'd have sensible people with sensible policies. Yeah. But the problem is that as long as we have sort of a first-past-the-post electoral system, the Greens are never going to be significantly represented in Parliament.
Well, they're certainly not going to be represented enough. We know that when there is a fairer voting system, like in the European elections, over 1 million people voted Green, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Right now, under first past the post, it is harder, but nonetheless, a strong Green vote still sends a really strong message.
Why is there such reluctance to alter first past the post from parties like the Conservative Party?
Well, the problem is you've got to get the turkeys to vote for Christmas.
Right.
You have to get the MPs sitting there in their safe seats to say, yes, I'm going to vote not to have a safe seat anymore.
We spoke to the Greens, and we continually get at the Trews people saying, come on, Russell, the Greens are good people. Natalie Bennett, clearly decent. Caroline Lucas is a lovely human being, the very kind of person you want making political decisions, not some crackpot lunatic or any technocrat. You want Caroline Lucas, people that are lifelong committed activists, but as they themselves admitted, unless there's considerable, massive electoral reform in our country, the Green Party cannot impose those politics.
I want them to be happy. I don't want them to have to worry about us when we're older.
We're the party of pensioners. They actually cut $5 billion from pension allowances that had already been established. Also, disability cuts have led to 60 people dying who needn't have done in 4 years. This is actually the nub of propaganda, to take people's emotional feelings and tie it through arbitrary means such as music and image to economic policies that do not relate in any way to the things that those people are saying. Sort of like the opposite of the truth in a little weird TV programme. The Conservative Party made a propaganda film full of fear. When I spoke to Ed Miliband, David Cameron, Russell Brand's a joke. Do you know what I think's a joke? 900,000 people using food banks in an apparently civilised, wealthy country. 0-hour contracts. A feeling of total antipathy, loss and despair among ordinary British people. So that's how I feel about David Cameron and the Tories. Obviously, notoriously, famously, and I think correctly, Ed Miliband came round to chat to us face to face. Now, we kept back some of that interview. For me, the bit that was most important, the bit that was most interesting, now exclusively on the Trews, here is the part of the interview that I found most encouraging.
I think the way we think about politics is slightly faulty, because the way we think about it goes back to this point about, is it elect me on day one and the world is transformed? Or is it we're on a path of change? And one of the things that strikes me, and this is how we're trying to change the Labour Party, and I think we've been actually quite successful at this, is you've got to have a politics that is sort of rooted again in communities.
Yeah.
So you've got to have sort of, it's not just, Tories are a sort of virtual party these days, so they sort of exist with advertising and money, but they don't have people.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think that's part of also what's got to change. Think about, let me give you an example, right? The living wage. You know about the living wage campaign. Right. The living wage campaign didn't come out of policy, wonks who's sitting around saying, sort of, let's have a living wage. It came out of people, especially in the 1970s in America, in workplaces saying, a living wage. It's the idea that, if you go out to work, you should be able to live on that wage.
Yeah.
Take two other big issues this year, climate change and international development. Part of what's going to have to happen is the movement is going to have to put pressure on governments all around the world to step up to the plate on climate change. It's about change that happens because obviously politics makes it happen, because that's where I started and that's what was my sort of original disagreement with you in this conversation. But it's about people sort of playing their part.
I completely agree with that. Even though I have cultivated my look and to some degree identity on looking like some giddy, fast-talking saviour character, the more I've learned about politics, the more I realise that what you want is galvanised people that have a voice and that feel like their voice can be heard, whether it's in housing campaigns, living wage campaigns, as you have mentioned, breaking down of powerful institutions that prevent ordinary people from having power. And I would see your election as a Labour Prime Minister as the beginning of a proper conversation between an activated, community-led Britain where politicians do feel accountable, where politicians do feel that they've got to listen to ordinary people, not listen to lobbyists, not listen to people. I think that's true. I think they're going to get people on the streets, because like you said, it ain't going to change overnight. It's not like, May the 8th, everything's cushy.
I don't think we can just sort of kick over the traces, right? We can't just say, look, this is where, kind of my dad would have had a different position from me.
Yeah.
You probably know about my dad.
Yeah, Ralph Miliband was banging to the socialism.
Yeah, it was one way of putting it. But, you need a banking system. Now it's got to be done in the right way and it's got to be fair. And it's got to work for people.
Hasn't it got to be that if the interests of the banks start getting put ahead of the interests of ordinary people, banks suffer, not people suffer. And what we've felt for years and years is it's that people suffer. Because Rupert Murdoch, people have a go at me about not voting, Rupert Murdoch don't vote, yet somehow he seems to decide who runs our country. So I think
I don't think he does decide anymore, but we'll see what happens.
I bloody hope not.
Yeah.
I bloody hope not. I hope that has changed. I hope ordinary people, through a premiership of a decent person who wants to confront those interests on behalf of ordinary people, can present us with a better Britain. And I think it's cool what you say about it not being the election's the beginning, not the end.
Exactly.
And that it's not about euphoria, it's about stability and a sort of a dialogue with the British people where they're heard over the interests of the powerful. Then I think what we've got is something worth voting for.
Thank you.
Ed Miliband says something very important, that we need a kind of politics where communities are involved, where communities are engaged. I think one of the things that came across in our interview is that there are limitations to what conventional Westminster politics can deliver. We've all been feeling that. There's so many limitations. There are sort of problems that are so entrenched we can't even see where they begin and end. But one thing I agree very sincerely with Ed on is that politics doesn't rain down on us. It comes from below. Movements putting pressure on governments. We don't know what the limitations of a Labour administration are going to be, but we have just heard the leader of the Labour Party saying that he welcomes and wants pressure from below. For me, what that interview meant is that Ed Miliband understands that people are pissed off. People have had enough of their needs being neglected because of the requirements of big business. What I've learned over this period of time where I've been talking about politics and getting involved since that Paxman interview, since my book, is that we are in a dangerous position in this country. The Conservative Party are planning to further dismantle our community assets, to tear apart the very fabric of our society. That's not something that we can allow to happen simply because people can't be bothered or don't want to vote. I know I've been Mr. Don't Vote, but actually what I mean is politics isn't something that we can just be involved in once every 5 years. Democracy is for every day, not just for elections. Democracy has to be something you're constantly involved in, whether you're students occupying your university, whether your community is coming together to reclaim your housing, whether you're people running worker-run cooperatives. We have to confront big business. We have to confront the people that are tearing apart London and socially cleansing it. What I heard Ed Miliband say is if we speak, he will listen. So on that basis, I think we've got no choice but to take decisive action to end the danger of the Conservative Party. David Cameron might think I'm a joke, but I don't think there's anything funny about what the Conservative Party have been doing to this country, and we have to stop them. So my view is this: if you're Scottish, you don't need an English person telling you what to do. You know what you're going to be doing. If you're in Brighton, I think it will be a travesty if we lost the voice of Caroline Lucas in Westminster. But anywhere else, you've got to vote Labour. You've got to get the Conservative Party out of government in this country so that we can begin community-led activism, so that we can be heard continually. So on housing, on poverty, inequality, on working, on all of these things for the most vulnerable, for the most powerful, so that we have a voice and that we can build a society. Of course, the election isn't going to change things overnight. It's going to be not enough of a change. There's loads of things I could complain about with Ed Miliband. There's loads of things, Trident, this, the mugs with immigrant. There's loads of things I could moan about. But what's important is this bloke will be in Parliament, and I think this bloke will listen to us. So on May the 7th, vote Labour. On May the 8th, more democracy, more power to more communities for all of us, for me, for you, for Trews, for Trewsers. Subscribe here.
Nose is a tool that is abused to fool you and to leave you scared and confused. Trews is like the nose. If the nose was true, I want some Trews. Let's have some Trews.